Are live service games going the way of the dodo? Well, of course not, but I think this current trend is a positive one. PlayStation continues to cancel live service games that are in development. Hello everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and the funniest thing could have possibly happened. Concord may have been such a giant, colossal failure that it may actually shift PlayStation's overall development vision going into the future. It's been talked about for a while how Sony and PlayStation just have so many live service games coming down the pipeline. I think the number being thrown around a while back was like 12 or something, and it seems like every month more and more are just getting cancelled. And Bloomberg, link in the description down below, is reporting that Sony said they cancelled 2 more. To quote Bloomberg here, the games at Oregon-based Bend Studio and Texas-based Bluepoint Games were both live service projects designed to draw recurring revenue from players. It's important to note that, according to the article, again, neither studio is being shuttered. But what I do find interesting is this line from the article. A company spokesperson confirmed the cancellations. In a statement, the spokesperson said the 2 games were cancelled following a recent review, in quotations, and that PlayStation will continue making both online and single-player games. That feels PR in terms of the wording there, and we also don't know the scale of it. Okay, they're going to make both online and single-player games. Duh, everyone does, at least in terms of console developers. But like, how many? What's the ratio between online and single-player games? We may not know what the conclusion of that recent review was, but it led to the decision to cancel these games specifically. Time will tell, obviously, what the future direction of Sony will end up looking like. The PS5 era for Sony has been awkward to say the least. From a company that used to be known and renowned for its variety, its breadth of games, its giant catalog of experiences, its entries with the PS5 generation have been lacking to say the least. There's been some really great and stellar titles, however, they've been very few and far between. And it made it so when they actually put out a game like Astrobot, it felt more like an anomaly than a return to the old. Kinda like a broken clock is right twice a day. It just happened with Astrobot that they were really right. And speaking of when they were really wrong, Concord, a game for all intents and purposes, felt as if it was going to be the epitome of this new era for PlayStation, this live service-centric era, and it was a colossal failure. Now, PlayStation has one big success when it comes to live service, and that is Helldivers 2, because that game actually offered a unique way to experience a live service game, was rather fairly monetized, and had an overall great gameplay loop, and a unique way to convey its actual story and what was happening. And kind of like how Astrobot feels like more of an anomaly than, say, a return to tradition, Helldivers 2 felt like an anomaly. It was actually really good. And sure, it had its hiccups, but seemingly is back on track. But I don't think most people were under the illusion that the other live service games that PlayStation were going to at least plan to pump out were going to be of that quality or that unique. And the fear was that they were just going to take all their established IP and just pump out live service slop for all of these IP instead of developing new single-player titles that Sony were beloved for, or even going back to their backlog of IP that they have at their disposal and just underutilize. I think it's a bit of an interesting situation we found ourselves in when it comes to PlayStation, and an interesting place I think Sony themselves have found themselves in. Because with the success of a game like Marvel Rivals, which is a hero-based team shooter, you can't just simply attribute the failure of Concord to the genre that it was in. You can't simply say, because Concord was a live service hero shooter, it failed. You can't say that when you have a game find massive success like Marvel Rivals. So the failure of Concord has to be attributed to factors and characteristics unique to Concord that aren't simply because it's a hero shooter. Boring and lackluster character design and uninteresting marketing, for me, are the 2 big ones. And the game itself didn't seem as if it brought anything unique or special to the table. It kinda just reeked of, well, being live service slop. But I don't want this video to be specific about Concord and the failings of that specific game. There's plenty of think pieces on the internet covering that idea, right? And I've talked about Concord before, but I always found it interesting that giant AAA studios and giant game companies like Sony, like PlayStation, like so many others, gravitated and latched onto the idea of live service games as hard as they did, because as a business you would think they would prioritize stability, that they would prioritize guaranteed ways to make a lot of money, and live service games, by nature of the industry, are essentially a gamble. Is the game good enough, and does it stand out enough, and will it generate enough hype and publicity by itself to garner a massive player base that is also sustained in order to support the development and the ongoing costs of active development if you want this game to go on for so long. And it leads to saturation in the market because people only have so many hours in the day. It's not like you can realistically play every live service game that is out there. You simply just don't have enough time or energy. And if the industry on the whole, and Sony specifically, just keeps pumping out live service games after live service games, eventually you oversaturate the market to where your new titles just feel bland and generic, hi Concord, or people just become disinterested in the idea of them, to be frank with you. I mean, Marvel Rivals at least has the Marvel IP, so people already have an attachment to those characters, while also having rock-solid gameplay from the looks of it. I didn't play the game. And character design that, let's say, catches the eye. I myself am someone who have absolutely burnt themselves out on competitive hero shooters. I played Overwatch quite a bit on launch, and I just got tired of them. And they all just kind of look the same to me at this point. That's clearly not the case for a lot of people out there. Marvel Rivals is massively successful, so clearly there's still a market there. But I think what Sony is realizing is that they've invested so much time, money, and energy on high-risk, low chance of success titles by nature of what they are as live service games. That always felt silly to me as a company to do, but you would only do it if you had absolutely no knowledge of the industry you're in, and you just saw the success of these games and believed in your heart of hearts while looking at charts and graphs without the context of actually knowing how gamers think and feel. Without actually having played these games yourself, you would believe you can copy that success to some degree and cash in on this giant piggy bank. But games, especially to this size and scale of live service games, take so many years of development that by the time they come out, you've missed the boat. And if you're over-reliant on trends, you're years out of their window. You're late to the party. Marvel Rivals can succeed because at the end of the day, people view that to be a good game, and people still love superhero stuff. They love Marvel as an IP. They love those characters. They grew up with those characters. I don't even play Marvel Rivals, but I can at least understand why that game succeeded the way that it has. And I seriously doubt that the money heads behind PlayStation and these other giant corporations out there have any understanding why. I seriously doubt that they do. And you have to imagine to some degree it's embarrassing for them. They had a game that in their eyes was just like the one that blew up and succeeded. Why didn't theirs? And it seems like their response, their reaction to all of this, is to not go as hard into live service entries going into the future as they originally planned to. Now, we don't know necessarily why these live service games have been canned. Perhaps they just simply did not look good. And if Concord was the one that managed to ship, I fear what these games actually looked like. If Concord in their eyes was the better one. And the hope that I have is that we see a course correction from Sony here to properly utilize the veritable vault of IP at their disposal to create new and fresh games in these franchises that people yearn to see again. I don't want Astro Bot to be a one-and-done experience. I don't want Astro Bot to be the exception to the rule. I want it to be the start of a new era for Sony, because that would be the ideal. Because most people that play Astro Bot love the game. I played Astro Bot. I love the game. It's great. And I'm not even a platformer guy, but the game was fun and it was simple and it had vision and it stuck to its identity and didn't try to be something that it wasn't. The game was an unabashed love letter to the history of Sony, whereas a lot of the decisions that Sony makes nowadays feel antithetical to that idea, to the idea of respecting what came before and what shaped Sony and PlayStation to become the juggernaut that it is today. There was another report going around that the Horizon MMO that was announced was also cancelled. I think that article retracted their statement and said it's not necessarily the Horizon game that was cancelled, but it just doesn't look good, It's a tricky and awkward situation that Sony have found themselves in, but they found themselves there by their own design. They did manage at least one win, one victory in this live service push, and that is Helldivers 2. And maybe you disagree with me, viewer out there, maybe you do. I just don't see these other live service games they still have in the pipeline being as unique or creative or interesting or engaging like Helldivers 2. Maybe we get a couple extra really cool games. Maybe Sony can do it. I kind of doubt it though. And my personal preference here would be for them to alter their course. Look at why Astro Bot worked so well, why people love that game. Examine the history of PlayStation, why people fell in love with PlayStation all those years ago, and go back to that identity. Nintendo did it, and there's no reason Sony can't either. It'll be interesting to see. Does Sony double down and continue down this path of failure? Because that's what it is. You can't keep pumping out games that just cataclysmically fail like Concord did. That's not a sustainable business model. Or do they course correct? Either pump out live service games that people actually like Helldivers 2, go back to the days of old and pump out a bunch of great games that have a consistent flow of variety, like games like Astrobot. Maybe a healthy mix between the two, it's possible. We have to wait and see. I always thought this push to live service was short-sighted to begin with, and that the business model of leaning into high-risk, high-reward game experiences like live service games and pumping out so many of them to an already saturated market was a foolish approach and would come to bite them in the butt, and it seemingly has. And from top to bottom, it felt like decisions were made by people that simply didn't understand the gaming medium. They didn't understand why people liked Sony, why people liked these IPs. They didn't understand why they loved PlayStation. Hopefully they learn. And with that, I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody, till we meet again.